The sacraments, source of grace and devotion. Welcome back to our series on Introduction to the Devout Life by Saint Francis de Sales. In our previous episode, we discussed the importance of daily prayer and meditation in nourishing our relationship with God. And today, we will be focusing on another powerful source of spiritual growth, the sacraments. Saint Francis de Sales calls the sacraments the well springs of grace that sustain our devotion and strengthen our souls. Let's explore how we as religious can draw from these sacred sources to deepen our commitment to God. The role of sacraments in the devout life. Saint Francis de Sales tells us that the sacraments are God's way of coming to us, drawing us closer to Him and filling us with His precious grace. Just as daily prayer is essential for spiritual growth, so too are the sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession. These sacraments provide grace we need to overcome our weaknesses, live in devotion, and fulfill our vocations. For religious, priests, and seminarians, the sacraments are not just important, they are indispensable. The grace we receive through them gives us the strength to carry out our ministries, to live faithfully in community, and to grow in holiness. As Saint Francis teaches, the sacraments are like spiritual medicines, healing us from sin and helping us become more like Christ. The Eucharist as the center of devotion. Saint Francis de Sales calls the Eucharist the sacrament of devotion, and for good reason. In the Eucharist, we receive Jesus Himself, body, blood, soul, and divinity. This sacrament unites us more deeply with Christ and fills us with His love and grace. For religious, the Eucharist should be at the center of our spiritual lives. Saint Francis encourages us to receive the Eucharist as often as possible. Not only during obligatory masses, he reminds us that each time we receive Christ in the Eucharist, we are being nourished and strengthened in our devotion. The Eucharist gives us the grace to persevere in prayer, to serve with joy, and to love others as Christ loves us. For example, think of the Eucharist as the fuel that keeps a fire burning. Just as a fire needs wood to stay alive, our souls need the grace of the Eucharist to keep our devotion burning brightly. When we regularly receive this sacrament, we are constantly renewed and empowered to live our vocation with zeal. Confession, a sacrament of healing and growth. Another sacrament that Saint Francis emphasizes for the devout life is confession. He calls it a sacrament of healing because it restores us to grace when we have fallen into sin. No matter how small the sin, it weakens our soul and separates us even slightly from God's love. Confession repairs that break and strengthens our resolve to live more faithfully. Saint Francis advises us to go to confession regularly, not just when we have committed serious sin, but even for venial sins. He says that frequent confession is a powerful way to keep our souls pure and ready to receive God's grace. For the religious, Regular confession is a way to remain humble, acknowledge our need for God's mercy, and to stay on the path of holiness. For example, imagine a gardener who frequently weeds his garden. If he waits too long, the weeds will overrun the flowers. But if he regularly pulls out the small weeds, the garden remains healthy and beautiful. In the same way, frequent confession helps us pull out the weeds of sin before they take root in our souls. It keeps us spiritually healthy and open to God's grace. Other sacraments as well as wellsprings of grace. While Eucharist and confession are central to the devout life, St. Francis also encourages us to draw grace from the other sacraments, especially those that mark significant moments in our spiritual journey. For priests and seminarians, the sacrament of holy orders is a continual source of grace for your ministry. Each day, you are called to live out the graces of your ordination in service to God's people. For nuns, your vows are like a permanent sacramental bond, uniting you to Christ in a unique and powerful way. Whether it's matrimony for married or the sacrament of anointing of the sick in times of illness, all sacraments provide grace that helps us live more fully in God's love. Living a sacramental life. So, how do we live a sacramental life? St. Francis gives us a few key practices to keep the sacraments at the center of our spiritual journey. Tip 1. Frequent reception of the Eucharist. First, prioritize frequent reception of the Eucharist. Whenever possible, participate in daily Mass and receive Jesus as often as you can. The more we receive the Eucharist, the more Christ dwells within us, transforming us into His image. Tip 2. Regular confession. Commit to regular confession. Don't wait until you have fallen into serious sin. Make it a habit to examine your conscience frequently and seek God's mercy in the sacrament of confession, even for smaller sins. Tip 3. Reflect on the graces of your vocation. Regularly reflect on the graces you have received through your specific vocation, whether it is holy orders, religious vows, or the sacrament of matrimony. Remember that these sacraments provide you with the grace to fulfill your unique calling, and thank God for the strength they give you. In conclusion, the sacraments are the surest and most powerful way to grow in devotion. They are God's gift to us, providing grace, healing, and strength for our spiritual journey. By living a sacramental life, we open ourselves to the transforming power of God's love, allowing Him to work in us and through us. As we wrap up, here are the key takeaways from today's session. 1. The sacraments are wells of grace. The sacraments, especially the Eucharist and confession, sustain our spiritual lives and keep us connected to God's grace. 2. The Eucharist is the center of devotion. Frequent reception of the Eucharist fills us with Christ's love and strengthens us for our vocation. 3. Confession heals and strengthens. Regular confession purifies our souls, helping us stay on the path of holiness and live our vocation more fully. Fourth, live a sacramental life. Participate regularly in the sacraments. Reflect on the graces of your vocation and allow the sacraments to transform your lives. Thank you for joining me today as we explored the sacraments and their role in our spiritual growth. In our next episode, we will discuss how to choose and practice specific virtues that can help us grow in holiness. Until then, live Jesus.